Hi, I'm MacKenzie Fegan, and this is 112 BK. Coming up, while the arts are known for being a progressive arena, there are still issues around race, gender, and inclusivity because, obviously. Today, we'll talk to the scion of a performing arts pioneer who paved the way for Black theater artists.
No matter how much Stanislavski she studied or whatever, she was going out for like housekeeper, like prostitute. And for her, that was really a point of contention.
And then, that was Gabrielle Garo on the flute, and she and Lakeisha Benjamin will be talking about women in jazz who are flouting convention.
People tell me I sound beautiful, I sound cute, it was a pretty solo. Versus with the guys, they're like, oh, that was killing, that was amazing, oh, you're a monster.
And then also like the phrase, like, play like a man.
With the advent of electric lights in the late 19th century, Broadway, with its bright marquees made up of hundreds of bulbs, earned the nickname the Great White Way. But the nickname could have also applied to Broadway's racial composition. American theater, like America itself, has historically had an ugly relationship to race, with minstrel shows trading on bigoted stereotypes and African American actors, directors, writers, and audiences excluded from mainstream theater. With that history in mind, in 1968, Barbara Ann Teer founded the National Black Theater Company in Harlem. It was the first revenue-generating black arts institution in the city, and this year it celebrates its 50th anniversary. To tell us about the role the National Black Theater played in the fight for civil rights and its legacy today, we were recently joined by Teer's daughter and the company's CEO, Sade Lythcott. Here's that conversation. Sade, thank you so much for joining us. So your mom founded the National Black Theater in the late 60s. Tell me a little bit about her. What was she doing before she decided to start this theater company?
Yeah, so National Black Theater was founded 50 years ago in 1968. My mom was, she started out her artistic career as a dancer. Modern dance. She was in Ailey's first company and really thought that the trajectory of her career would be dance. And then she got a really horrible knee injury that precluded her from dancing anymore, and that's when she started to study acting. And she kind of studied with the best of the best. And what she found was that she was overtrained, overqualified for the roles that she would be able to go out for. And so think about it, in the 60s, it was like all of the roles for African Americans were very trope driven. So for her, no matter how much Stanislavski she studied or whatever, she was going out for like housekeeper, like prostitute. And for her, that was really a point of contention. And she was noticing that her peers, talented, incredible, young African-American, people of color, all have the same kind of issue. And so that in and of itself was a community. And so she wanted to do something about it. And she started something called the Group Theater Workshop out of her partner's loft at the time, Robert Hooks. And she was teaching young, aspiring actors to act of color. And she was so well trained that she thought that this was her path, this idea about like having a laboratory, training young people, but yet they would go out into the industry and have these same kind of obstacles. So Group Theater Workshop, very interestingly, turned into the Negro Ensemble Company, NEC, which is probably one of the most famous black theater companies in history. It's where Denzel and Sam Jackson and all of those folks came out of. For her, that was great to be able to have better representation in the diversity of narrative. But for her, she was like this very subversive woman. 1968, if you remember, like this country was on fire, right? It was the assassination of Dr. King. Almost every community rioted around that assassination. Dr. King's last speech, he talks about build Black institutions, you know. And so she really believed that the only way to do both the work of activism through the vehicle of theater and empower our communities for the sole purpose of liberation was to start her own. And not just start her own, but start it in the communities in which we live, work, and serve.
She wrote this amazing op-ed that was published in the Times in 1968. I believe at the same time she founded the theater company called We Can Be What We Were Born to Be.
Yeah.
And I'll just read a little passage here. For those brothers and sisters who are still tied to Whitey and have not yet seen the need to shape Black cultural art expression, let's look at one of Whitey's institutions, the American Theater, an establishment developed, owned, and operated by him for the sole purpose of making money. And she really rails against this idea that it's possible to work within the framework of a racist system. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Dr. King, but a lot of what she's saying actually sounds more like Malcolm X.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about your mom's thinking in terms of that, Martin versus Malcolm dichotomy?
Her whole kind of modality or pedagogy around National Black Theater was F. Whitey, right? So the idea that you would rail against a system really empowers the system. Like, that's your role, right? Whether your role is to step in line with everything or to kind of protest it, you're still working within that framework. For example, her first company, she didn't believe in actors. All of her actors in the first company of National Black Theater were called liberators. The purpose was to shift the consciousness of a people, a community, and ultimately the consciousness of America, which is why we're the National Black Theater.
I'm curious about what she saw art's role in the liberation of a people or in the dismantling of systems of oppression. She wrote in that same op-ed that she almost wanted to see Black theaters as like cultural sandboxes where strong political and social messages could be delivered to Black audiences and both reflect truth but also help imagine a different possibility and a different future. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about how she thought about art as a power for social change?
See, for her, race and racism was a social construct in which people invested in. But race is devoid of culture. And if you could infuse culture from all the way back into the stories of our lives, how then do we show up in the world? And so I think the thing about it was course-correcting our narratives. It was about creating kind of a kaleidoscope of Black lifestyle so that we can be humanized in a way. And so this idea of humanizing through radical, unapologetic Black narratives really set the framework for human transformation, right? This idea that when we see each other as brother and sister truly, because these stories kind of hit at the core of all of our souls, we begin to have different conversations. And so parity and equity look completely different when we share a human story, as opposed to invest in tropes that keep us marginalized and fighting against something.
I'm curious about what your mom thought about playwrights like Lorraine Hansberry or August Wilson, Black playwrights who were working within perhaps more of the white framework and had plays produced on Broadway.
Yeah, I think that opportunity was really important. I don't think anyone really shunned opportunity. It was more of a yes and conversation. And with August Wilson, one of his famous speeches on Golden Pond, he really thanked my mother and a list of other Black theater makers for being the bedrock for which he stands. You don't agree on everything, but I think that the point is we should be everywhere, right? And so they were very much a big part of us being everywhere.
So your mother founded the theater in 68, but in 69, it moved into a building in Harlem. Yeah. Can you tell me about the challenges that she faced in establishing a physical home for Black theater?
Yeah. So we actually moved up to Harlem in 1968, and we were renting space in an old jewelry factory. Funny story, in 1968, the Studio Museum, which is still in Harlem, and National Black Theater were renting separate floors in the same building. So we were founded at the same time in the same building.
What amazing energy in that building.
Yeah, exactly. And in 1983, The building is a 3-story building. The ground floor is retail, and then we occupied a floor of the building. The corner retail was a Kentucky Fried Chicken, which was right next to a dry cleaner. Kentucky Fried Chicken had this horrible grease fire. It kind of sparked with the chemicals of the dry cleaner and created like an explosion. It was a 6-alarm fire, and it brought our building to the ground. And so it left us homeless. And in the rubble, my mother really had this vision to purchase the city block, to purchase the building. And everyone thought she was crazy because she was a woman. They thought she was crazy because it was like a pile of ashes and rubble. And she made a declaration that she would be the first woman to buy this property and to build this institution on the most famous address in the world. And everyone thought she was crazy. But she knew that ownership was powerful. And she also knew that it was the most famous address in the world because you could go anywhere and you could say 5th Avenue and everybody would think New York City and opulence. And you say 125th Street and you would think Black culture and Harlem. So she wanted to buy the intersection of the two and build a temple of liberation, artistic liberation for her people. And she did. In 1986, we purchased the property and redeveloped it for her in order to do the kind of work, brave work, fearless work, unapologetic work. She knew that a part of that equation was owning our space so that we could empower people as entrepreneurial artists.
And now you are continuing your mother's legacy.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about maybe what has shifted since she originally conceived of the National Black Theater and how you're ushering it into a new century?
Lots have shifted and a lot has stayed the same. My mom passed away in 2008, and I was asked by the board to come on for 6 months while they headhunted a new CEO, and I've been there for 10 years. When I came on board, I really wanted to re-look at the original values, mission, and vision of the National Black Theater and get back to as close as possible that experimental conversation with liberation. So what we do is we then look at the script and we tease out a social justice or social impact theme that exists in the play, and we blow that up into a dramaturgical lobby exhibit that is always educational, always free and open to the public, and is the way that the production starts.
So you're coming to Brooklyn.
We're coming to
So you're up in Harlem normally, but you are collaborating with one of our cultural neighbors here in Brooklyn. What is Mothers of the Movements?
So we have partnered with Weeksville Heritage Center, and we're so excited about it. Weeksville is 180 years old. It was one of the first free Black communities ever in America, and they are doing such great preservation work, but also looking to partner. And so we've brought a new piece of work to them called Moms. It's a call and response piece, which is very indigenous to our culture. We've taken the papers and speeches of mothers of different movements. So it's my mom's op-ed piece in the New York Times, The Black Woman, She Does Exist, which has a response piece written by Chisa Hutchinson. There is Fannie Lou Hamer's Hattiesburg Address, reinterpreted by an incredible playwright who was once our playwright in residency, Imponiso Indofia, does a response piece to that. It'll be an exciting evening of discourse, dialogue, new work in response to these some buried manifests of what these women were thinking about and writing about so long ago.
And where can people find out more information about how to see the show?
So you can either go to our website, which is nationalblacktheater.org, or you can go to Weeksville's website.
Well, Sade, thank you so much for coming on the show. I
Thanks
appreciate
for
your time.
having me. Thanks.